house was quiet, not the peaceful kind, the kind that presses against your chest. I could still smell diesel on my hands, even though the deployment was over. The boots were off, sitting by the door, heavier than they ever were in the sandbox. The ringing in my ears wasn't from mortars anymore. It was from the absence of them. They tell you coming home is the easy part. They're wrong. Silence is where the war hides. In the living room, in the pause before sleep, in the way your eyes lock on nothing, staring past walls, past time, 1,000 yards out. That's when I found the letter, dated 1945. Paper worn thin, ink faded, but the weight of it, heavier than any ruck I ever carried. Written by a man who didn't know if tomorrow was promised. Written by someone who understood duty, brotherhood, and the cost of both. We learn early not to talk about certain things. You don't bring the sandbox home with you. You don't unload it on people who never stood watch at 3 in the morning. But that letter didn't care. It spoke in the same quiet language the war uses after the gunfire stops. And in that moment, I realized something they never tell you. The war doesn't end when you leave it. It waits. Brotherhood isn't something you sign up for. It happens to you. It's built in places where comfort doesn't exist. In foxholes carved out of frozen ground. In nights so cold your rifle feels warmer than your hands. You pass a cigarette you don't even want anymore just to remind yourself someone else is still breathing next to you. Out there, names fade fast. What matters is who's on your left, who's on your right, who's pulling security while you steal 5 minutes of sleep. Fear gets shared the same way water does. Quietly, without ceremony. No speeches, just a look that says, I've got you. You learn each other by sound before sight. The way boots hit gravel, the cough someone tries to hide, the silence that tells you something's wrong. Under fire, blood doesn't decide family. Survival does. And when someone goes down, a piece of you stays there with them. Always. That's why civilian friendships feel different after coming home. Not worse, just lighter. Built on words instead of moments where everything was on the line. Out here, people bond over opinions. Over weekends, over plans. Over there, you bond because you watched a man stand up when he could have stayed down. Because he dragged you back when your legs stopped listening. Because he never asked why. Brotherhood isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up when everything else falls apart. And once you've lived it, you carry it with you for the rest of your life. There's a moment every soldier remembers, even if they never talk about it. It doesn't come with gunfire. It comes with a briefing, a map on a table, a finger tracing a route that doesn't care who you are. Command says the words clean and calm. We move at first light. Everyone in the room understands what isn't said. That's when you realize your life has a price, and it's already been paid. Not because you did something wrong, because duty doesn't negotiate. You check your gear slower than usual. Count rounds you might never fire. Write nothing down, because you don't want to leave anything unfinished. You look at the guys next to you and think the same quiet thought. One of us won't be here tomorrow. Maybe more. Maybe you. It changes how you walk after that. How you breathe. How you think about luck and fate. You stop believing you're special. You stop believing you're protected. Survival becomes practical, not heroic. You don't move to be brave. You move because the man next to you is moving. Because stopping isn't an option anyone offered. That understanding rewires you. You don't waste words anymore. You don't waste moments. And when you come home, people talk about destiny and purpose. They mean well, but you know the truth they never saw. You lived because the math worked that day, and you carry that knowledge quietly, forever. Letters home lie, but not out of weakness. They lie out of love. You sit on an ammo crate with a pen that barely works, paper damp from the air, hands still shaking from something you won't name. You start the letter the same way every time. I'm okay, because that sentence is doing more than reporting status. It's standing guard between two worlds. You don't write about the smell that won't wash off. You don't write about the sound a body makes when it hits dirt. You don't write about the way night feels longer when you're counting breaths instead of hours. You write about weather, about chow, about how the guys are doing fine. You soften the edges until the truth fits inside an envelope. Not because you're hiding, but because you're protecting. You know once those words are read at a kitchen table, they can't be taken back. There's what's lived, and there's what's allowed to be said. The gap between them is wide, necessary. Every soldier learns that silence can be a form of duty. You carry the weight so the people back home don't have to. You let them sleep without seeing your memories when they close their eyes. Years later, when you read those letters again, they sound calm, almost gentle. But between every line is a truth that never made it home. And maybe that was the point. War doesn't move in months or years. It moves in moments. You can watch a man change between one sunrise and the next. A kid who joked too loud on the transport stops laughing. His smile tightens. His eyes learn where to rest when things go quiet. Time compresses out there. Weeks feel like decades. Birthdays pass without notice. Faces harden under dust and responsibility. Humor dries up first, then patience, then innocence. Not all at once, piece by piece, like gear left behind because it's too heavy to carry anymore. You notice it in the small things. How someone stops talking about home, how they clean their weapon longer than necessary, how they stare at nothing while their coffee goes cold. War teaches men to age fast because hesitation costs lives. That's why the letter matters. It freezes a moment that didn't last. Ink on paper holds a version of a man who still believed tomorrow was a given, who hadn't learned yet how fragile breath can be. You read the words and hear a voice that sounds lighter than the one you remember. That man didn't disappear. He was reshaped. And when you hold that letter years later, you realize you're not just reading history. You're holding proof of how quickly war takes what time never gets the chance to touch. People think it's the explosions that stay with you. They're wrong. It's the quiet afterward. The kind that drops all at once, like the world forgot how to breathe. Your ears are still ringing, but underneath that noise is something heavier. Absence. You hear it before you understand it. Gear settles. Dust drifts. Someone coughs, and then comes the roll call. Names spoken into still air, one by one. Each answer grounding you, until one doesn't come. The pause stretches longer than it should. No echo, no reply. Just silence. Standing there, refusing to move on. That's the sound that never leaves you. Gunfire fades. Engines shut down. The war keeps going anyway inside that gap where a voice used to be. You don't look around right away. You already know. Your body understands before your mind catches up. Later, back home, people complain about quiet rooms, about how silence feels awkward. They don't know this kind. The kind that fills a space where laughter once lived. The kind that shows up in the middle of the night, when there's nothing to distract you. That silence is louder than any weapon. It doesn't announce itself. It just waits and reminds you who didn't make it back. And once you've heard it, you carry it with you. Always. Coming home isn't a victory parade. It's a slow walk through a world that never stopped spinning. You step off the plane and everything looks the same. Streets, stores, smiles. People shake your hand and thank you for your service. They expect gratitude, relief, closure. They think the war stayed behind with the sand and the heat. It didn't. At home, noise feels wrong. Doors slam too loud. Laughter catches you off guard. You sit at the table and nod along, but part of you is still scanning exits, still measuring distance, still listening for something you can't name. The war is quiet now, but it's not unloaded. People want the story to end clean. Deployment, sacrifice, homecoming. They don't see the space in between. You're expected to smile because you made it back. And you do, because others didn't. Gratitude mixes with guilt until you can't tell them apart. Normalcy feels rehearsed, like wearing a uniform that doesn't quite fit anymore. Inside, the rifle is still loading. Memory by memory, night by night. You learn to live in two worlds. One that kept moving without you, and one that never really let you leave. And you don't complain. You don't explain. You just carry it. Because coming home isn't about celebration. It's about learning how to stand still, while the war finally decides whether to loosen its grip. Survivor's guilt doesn't show up on a calendar. It doesn't fade with time. It just changes where it hides. You can be standing in a grocery store staring at a shelf you don't need anything from, and suddenly a face is there, clear as day. A guy who should have grown old. A laugh that never made it home. It hits without warning in places that are supposed to be safe. Living starts to feel like a quiet betrayal. You got more years, more mornings, more chances, and you never asked for them. You replay moments you had no control over, wondering why the math worked out for you and not for them. There's no answer that feels right. At night, it's worse. Bedrooms are too quiet. The dark gives memory room to stretch. You hear voices that don't call your name anymore. You see faces exactly as they were, not older, not faded, frozen in time. That's what the letter does. It opens the door all the way. You read words written by a man who didn't know he wouldn't come back, and suddenly they're all there again, standing shoulder to shoulder, young, certain, alive. The paper doesn't shake, but your hands do. Survivor's guilt isn't about wanting to trade places. It's about carrying everyone with you, everywhere you go. And you do it quietly, out of respect, out of love. You don't always know who they are right away, but you feel it. It's in the way they enter a room, the way they pause before sitting down, the way their eyes keep moving even when their body is still. No uniform, no patches, nothing obvious, just a posture that doesn't belong to civilian time. Sometimes it's a glance across a bar, a nod that lasts half a second too long. No words exchanged, because none are needed. Veterans recognize each other by what's missing, the jokes that don't get finished, the silence that doesn't feel awkward, the way conversations drift and come back without explanation. There's no need to ask where someone deployed. You already know the answer lives somewhere you don't push into. Shared trauma doesn't need translation. It speaks in pauses, in the way someone listens more than they talk. You can sit for hours and say almost nothing. Talk about weather, about work, about nothing important at all, and still feel understood in a way that's hard to explain to anyone else. There's a comfort in knowing the other person has stood in places where fear wasn't theoretical. That brotherhood doesn't fade. Time doesn't dilute it. Distance doesn't erase it. It's not about war stories. It's about recognition. A quiet agreement that some things were carried, and still are. And in a world that kept moving without you, that unspoken connection reminds you that you were never alone, even when you thought you were. The letter didn't bring closure. It wasn't meant to. There was no relief in finishing the last line, no sudden peace, just a deeper understanding settling in, slow and heavy, the kind that doesn't fix anything, but finally names it. You realize the letter wasn't written to end a story. It was written to survive one. Holding it, you stop asking why the war stayed with you. The answer's been there all along. War doesn't shut off when the fighting stops. It lingers in the men who carried it, in the ones who never got the chance to put it down. The letter didn't heal wounds. It honored them. It reminded me that memory is a form of duty, that forgetting is the real danger. As long as those names are spoken honestly, as long as their words are read without polishing the truth, the war hasn't been wasted. It's been witnessed. We talk a lot about moving on, about closure, about letting go, but some things aren't meant to be released. They're meant to be carried with care, with respect, with silence when needed. That letter changed how I remember, not with pride alone, but with accuracy, because war doesn't end when the last shot is fired. It ends when the last soldier is remembered, not as a symbol, but as a human being. The letter goes back into its envelope, but the weight of it stays, not as pain alone, but as purpose. If you're listening to this and the war followed you home, if the nights are long, if the silence feels heavier than the noise ever was, hear this clearly. You are not broken, you are not weak, and you are not alone in this battle. What you carry has a name, and it's carried by more people than you think. There's honor in surviving, there's honor in remembering, and there's hope in knowing that the story doesn't end in isolation. The men who wrote those letters, the ones who came home, and the ones who didn't, they're not asking to be glorified. They're asking to be remembered honestly, as human beings who stood their watch and paid the price in ways most will never see. If this story meant something to you, if you respect the men and women who carried that burden, type "thank you" or "respect" in the comments. Not for attention, but as a quiet salute. And if you choose to subscribe, do it for one reason only: to honor the next story, the next name, the next memory that deserves to be spoken. Until then, stand your watch, take care of each other, and remember, no soldier is ever truly forgotten as long as someone is still listening.